I'm Sue Herrera. Listening to all your comments. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to be on the call with us. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just jump in and get started. We are going to ask you today to participate however you feel comfortable participating. So if you want to drop some ideas in the chat or some thoughts in the chat, or if you want to unmute and just share your thoughts, we would certainly welcome that. Can everyone see my screen okay? Okay. So this session is entitled Math Data, a Closer Look and the Path Forward. So we're going to be using a Atlas data protocol today, and we're going to share that protocol with you at the end of the call so that if you should want to use it as you unpack data with your staff, you'll have it available. But the 4 questions are, what do you see in the data? What does the data suggest? What are the assumptions we make about learning? And what are the implications for teaching and assessment? And all of that is couched around data. So we're going to take one question at a time. But first, let me share with you how this data is going to be displayed on the screen, because sometimes the way it's organized, we just have to wrap our brain around it. So it's in bar graphs, and the lowest score is at the bottom. So below basic is at the bottom, with the top of the bar for each grade level being advanced. And it's going to start with a big statewide overview, just in general by subject and content. And then it's going to drill down to student subgroups. So we're going to start first with just grade levels and ELA. We ready to go? Yeah. Okay. So this is your ELA 22-23, grades 3 through high school. Remember, below basic is on the bottom and advanced is at the top. And I'm just going to give you a second if you want to jot some thoughts on some notes you're taking. Just what do we see in the data? Some things that, of course, jump out to me just really quickly would be that our youngest learners who are first taking it seem to have quite a few kids in below basic. So those are just some of the things you might say that you see. Val, if you see some things in the chat that you think we want to shout out, go ahead and do that for me, okay?
Sure.
Okay. We're going to do the same big picture view with math, grades 3 through algebra 2. Remember, below basics at the bottom and advanced is at the top.
So one thing I found interesting, it looks like it's secondary in ELA, and they scored a much better in ELA than they did in math in secondary, but you kind of see a jump that they do better on EOCs.
Yeah.
Not so much in math. There's not as big of a jump.
I'm going to go back, attempt to go back here at, I don't know if I can. I wanted you to be able to see that math and ELA is not that much different. It's almost like you're seeing the same slide.
For 3rd through 4th.
Mm-hmm. We're going to go on to science. Not as many grade levels assessing in science, obviously. 5th, 8th, biology, and physical science.
Pretty similar.
Yes. So we're really thinking about what do we see in this data. And this orange band, again, is our basic. And, you know, when we get our data reported, we often think with proficient and advanced being grouped together. And then here's our social studies for American government and American history. And this data does look very different than some of the other data that we just showed you. So what do you see in the data? Take a minute and drop some thoughts in the chat or unmute and share with us. We'd love to be able to hear your thoughts, read your thoughts. And Val, if there's anything you want to share from the chat, we'll take it. Give you a few minutes.
So
would you mind going back to I'm a visual person, so could you go back to some of those slides?
Sure. My screen is not wanting to go back, Val, so that's part of my problem. So give me just a second. There we go. I just had to refresh it. So there's ELA, grades 3 through English 2. And there's math. My eyes almost play a trick on me because it seems somewhat similar. Once again, there's ELA.
It's similar K through 8, but there's
Yes.
a big shift at EOC between ELA and math.
Correct.
I noticed.
I've got my elementary brain on. Yes. Thanks, Shauna. And then Val, I'm going to move on to science, just as a reminder. And social studies. And then we're back to what we see in the data.
And I guess since we're kind of moving through this data quickly, another way to think about it is you've been viewing your data, I'm sure. I'm wondering if it follows state trends or, are you seeing similar patterns in your own data? Statewide would be an interesting question as well.
Right. I know a lot of that data is embargoed still, but preliminary data has definitely come out to building leaders. And I know I was talking to some colleagues recently, and we're looking at this 42% proficient and advanced for 3rd grade. And so you always want to compare your data to the state and see if you meet the mark, exceed the mark, or miss the mark. And so those would be conversations to definitely have.
Well, we still see that a majority of students are, it looks like in almost every, except when you get to secondary, in those bottom tiers below basic, they still together, they kind of outweigh our proficient advanced for sure.
And we have a comment in the chat that the majority of elementary students are not meeting proficiency in ELA and math. And I'd like to add on to that when we look at our secondary data, it really kind of gives us a skewed view, because like English 1, those scores look great, but that's an optional EOC. And so we're really taking the cream of the crop to get these scores. So
points. That explains the discrepancy, because I'm like, that doesn't logically make sense that it pumps up so much. But you're right, if it's optional.
And similar in math with our geometry and our algebra 2, that's again the cream of the crop taking those assessments. So really, the majority of students in Missouri are not proficient in math and ELA.
And I had the opportunity to sit in a session with Susan German, who's our science DESE expert, and she was talking about the fact that we still are struggling so much with proficiency in science. And I took a bunch of notes and shared those on the network in a video. If you have a chance to jump on that and view what she had to say about the types of questions and what the future of the science state assessment is, it would be definitely worth your time. Okay, I'm going to move on. If you have thoughts that come to you, please feel free to put it in the chat, but I'm going to go on to a more focused view. We're going to break it down by student groups. And I want you to notice that the titles of the student groups are student groups, and it's got the 2 asterisks. So this includes Black, EL, free and reduced, Hispanic, and IEP student groups. Then you've got non-student groups, which I'm not sure how you can be a non-student. Percent of total tested population, and then all students. And for me, this slide is very different than the others because of the discrepancy that we see in below basic and advanced.
And Sue, I'm sorry to interrupt. We had a question in the chat. Why are EOCs optional? Our school takes EOCs in all of these areas. So the only required EOCs are actually Algebra 1, English 2, American Government, and Biology. And there has been talk at the state level of not leaving that option anymore. And then also, for a long time, the philosophy was the right test at the right time. Meaning if a student failed the course, they didn't have to take the EOC. Well, imagine what that does to scores. And so the last time that we had Jocelyn Strand on, she said that there was some discussion about changing that. So she's actually coming back in October, and I'm curious what the decision was about that procedure.
There might be somebody on the call who has some more thoughts about that too.
Because it's kind of it gives us a skewed system when we have some schools that are doing all, and people aren't following the same procedures for their EOCs.
Right. When we look at the student groups and we talk about our Black students, EL students, free and reduced, Hispanic, IEP students, there's a term that is often used to describe that group, and we would say disadvantaged students. And so we might be using that term throughout the presentation and thinking about the students that you serve. So this is the same data sets, the same grouping, but for math. One more thing I want to point out on ELA, and then I'll go to math one more time, is I just want you to see that these are by years. And we talk a lot about the COVID slip. I'm not sure that I see it in the data as much as we would assume we would see it. So from 2019 to 23, skipping, of course, 2020, this was ELA, and then here's your math. I'm kind of noticing a bump in 21, obviously, and you're below basic here. Maybe that would be what we would note as the COVID slip. And then here's science, grades 5, 8, and high school. Same student group identifications.
You can see a huge discrepancy between what you defined as disadvantaged learners to the all students group. I mean, I think that really sticks out to me when I look at the left hand from the right hand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you hardly see anything in the top proficient advanced band.
Right. And just the blues being your bookends, your low end and your high end, it's obvious that majority of our students live in these middle bands. Unfortunately, our disadvantaged students have a higher representation in below basic. Okay, this is a different breakdown. I'm going to go back. Free and reduced. I'm sorry, my screen's not cooperating. Free and reduced, all tested content areas and grades. So free and reduced lunch, non-free and reduced lunch, and then all students. So if you have any free and reduced lunch students that you serve in your school, this data is particularly important. If you don't, it might be somewhat surprising. This would absolutely represent the school I just retired from, where I was the principal. And then we're going to look at our IEP students, our special education students, all tested content areas and grades from 2019 to 23. Students that are on an IEP, your non-IEP, and then that average of all of those scores together. And again, we see our IEP students, half of them are below basic as they're performing on all tested content.
But to your point, from year to year, you don't really see that much up or down. It's just pretty plateaued.
Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, it would be really difficult if you remove the labels from some of these graphs to discern, well, what am I really looking at here? Because the graphs tend to blend together and they look so similar. There's a lot on this screen, but we're going to break it down by ethnicity, ELA and mathematics, grades 3 through high school blended together. So ELA and math. And we're going to do 2019, 21, 22, 23. And here are your ethnicity groups. So find the population that you serve the most and take a look at that and compare the state over time to what you're doing. And then find the group. I guess I would find the group that seems to be the most disadvantaged or scoring the lowest and kind of compare and ask yourself why. Why is that the case? I mean, sadly, what jumps out to me is that the students that I served fell in this category. And so your proficient and advanced in ELA and math was very low. 20 to 25%. So a quarter of your students were proficient and advanced. And then the rest of them were basic and below basic. Any thoughts on this slide? Anything we want to clarify or questions?
Well, looking at it, for me, it looks like all of the charts kind of go the same, except for the Pacific Islander. I don't know what happened in the 2023, but
right.
It's like before the pandemic, it was kind of, the pandemic hit everybody, you know what I mean? And it kind of went up and then it went back down. I don't think that really affected like the difference between them. You know what I mean? I know that
yes.
All the disadvantages are a lot lower, but it looked like it affected everybody the same. In 2021, everybody went down in scores and then they gradually go back up.
Right. It's a good point. So we've done the free and reduced lunch. We've done the big disadvantaged group. Now we've done by ethnicity. And then these are your charter. And we grouped all the content together. And just for public versus charter schools, just to see how are they performing from 19 to 23. Got a little bit of a rise here in your below basic after the pandemic. But overall, charter schools look similar to a couple of our ethnicity groups and disadvantaged groups. And so the big question is, that's the data that DESE gave us. What does it suggest to us as educators? What does this data say? I'm going to go back and just breeze through it real quick. There's ELA through the years, 19 to 23, grades 3 through high school. You're going to think you're seeing the same slide sometimes over and over again, and really it's not. And there's math. Science. Free and reduced lunch at all grade levels as compared to non-free and reduced lunch, and then the average of all students, IEP students. That chart looks different, as we would expect. And then by ethnicity, which we just talked about, ELA and mathematics. And then charter. So this would be a chance for you to share, what do you think does this data suggest to us? If you have a thought, throw it in the chat. I'll give you a few minutes just to think and process. And if we're ready to move on, we will.
Yeah, and I wonder at this point, could we do a chat bomb where everybody try to, even if it's just one or two words, something that it comes to that it would suggest? Because I think the power of these calls, I know it's hard and intimidating sometimes to unmute, but really, even if it's not just the data on the screen, you've been looking at some of yours. What do you think that as we look at these same trends, we're not really moving? So I really would encourage everybody to just throw something. We could bomb the chat with just different words or thoughts of what we think it's going to suggest. So let's give like 10 or 15 seconds for people to just kind of throw a word. Even if that suggestion is looking at your own data and not necessarily the state.
We've got stagnant, disadvantaged kids need more support than we're giving.
Rachel and Shelly channeled each other. They wrote the same word at the same time.
Love it. As a state, we've got some work to do. I had commented that I noticed that the ELA and math scores seem very similar in the lower grades. So if you can't read, you probably can't do the math. Val, it's hard for me to see everything. So if you notice something that we want to share, please read it for us.
Sure. Well, and I don't know if you heard me, but you said if you can't read, you can't do the math. And I said you can't do the science either.
Well, that's true. Yeah, very good point.
Well, and Kim Mock puts in here because they're all reading tests. And it's true. At the end of the day, reading impacts everything. You have to read the math questions and word problems. I'm curious, Julie, are you say resources? I'd love for you to expound on that and what you're meaning, like lack of resources or too many. Oh, we need more. Right. We're going to get that and state specific, right? And I think with the stagnation, we need something to help us move. That's really the commonality I'm seeing here. Small gains. Laura's like, we've got a lot of work to do. We're not getting growth. So thank you. I mean, sadly, I wish there wasn't a pattern, a trend, but we're all kind of seeing the same thing. And so if you don't mind, I'm going to have you just go through my slides for me too. So we're going to move to, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I jumped ahead.
No, you're fine. I follow Ken Williams. He does Unfold the Soul, and he's a great speaker on equity and education. And he put out something a couple of days ago that just resonated with me, that schools, we have are perfectly designed to achieve the results we're getting today. And so what does that mean? I mean, I was struck with the status quo that we seem to be able to maintain with mediocrity when you look at your scores. At least for me, as a newly retired building principal, I felt like I was, taking 3 steps forwards and 2 steps back constantly with data, just trying to figure it out. So the real question is, what can we do differently as school leaders? What can schools do differently? And here are some of DESE's supports. Here's what they're trying to do for us. Now I'm going to turn over to Shauna and let her unpack the last 2 questions of that Atlas protocol. But we know that DESE has done some things for us. They are trying to assist us, but it doesn't seem to be having the gains that they might hope it does. And so I'm going to turn it over to Shauna.
Yeah, and I appreciate you being explicit to connect DESE's response, because when we see that they are all reading tests with the Read, Lead, Exceed and the science of reading, I think they really are trying to support and have that big initiative. But again, sometimes it feels like one more thing. But the third question in the Atlas protocol is, okay, we see that things are stagnant. So what assumptions can we make about students and learning? And so I'm just going to give you what I think. So as I go through, I don't care what I do. So I want to start off with giving you some assumptions, but as I go through these, I want you to think, do I agree? Do I disagree? Right? Maybe there's some assumptions that I've come up with that you want to challenge, or maybe there's something new and we'd love to hear it. So here are some assumptions that we believe that some of our current systems for curriculum instruction aren't working. If we see this huge stagnation across, I would think it's a systemic issue. And as we see teacher burnout, now COVID did not help with that. And some, we're focusing on curriculum instruction. There's a whole lot of other things like mental health and behavior that are attributed to these things post-COVID as well. But we believe that I could assume that some of the teacher burnout we're seeing is because we're living in these same processes and broken systems. And Julie, it's interesting you put resources. I put sometimes teachers are relying on resources other than really looking at those standards. And the reason I did that is because one of the things we see as state consultants all the time, especially when I worked for the State Department, I saw it because I got to travel around to lots of different schools in Missouri. People are using so many resources, and so many resource companies are telling you, oh yeah, we align to your state standards. Well, those, not that I'm all about the test, but that's how we're graded. And if that assessment, the equity piece we give is that we teach the standards, the MAP and EOC assessments are over Missouri standards. And I think sometimes we get combobbled with all these resources and teachers don't have clarity of what the standards really are. And that's what we're assessed over. So I think sometimes we get ourselves in a pickle because we rely on this resource that may not even cover everything that kids are going to be exposed to. Assumption, our disadvantaged populations are not moving in the right direction. Then it goes back to my teachers sometimes rely on resources rather than their standards. So there's this huge alignment disconnect that I'm working really hard teaching you things that really you're never going to be assessed over. And then I think teachers' assumption we could make is that they need more clarity on what to do, right? Not only what is that test going to look like, but what do I do with kids who aren't moving? And I would assume that teachers are under-equipped to meet the needs of disadvantaged students, because I don't think it's a lack of wanting to at all. Teachers do. I mean, we spend hours thinking about it, but there's something there where we're not truly equipping them. And I just think an assumption I could have is we need more clarity on what to do because we're just kind of in the spinning state. So I kind of breezed through some of my assumptions. I'd love to chat, or anybody on mute. Are there any of those assumptions that you agree with or you'd want to challenge as far as burnout being related to this, or this idea that we're sometimes relying too much on resources, or this clarity on what teachers should do? Any assumptions you agree with or would like to challenge?
I'll chime in really quick. I agree on the idea of teachers are leaning too heavily on the resource piece and not utilizing the standards. In a lot of conversations I've had with other districts throughout the state, when we talk about curriculum development, teachers automatically, some districts automatically take that resource and make it the curriculum without aligning it to the standards. And I think we're seeing more of that. And when you do a deep dive into those resources, they really aren't teaching all the standards that we are assessing students on.
Yes, Shirley, thank you. That exactly is what I was seeing as a state consultant was happening all the time. And so then we're blaming teachers, but it's this programming that someone sold to you that you want it to be the silver bullet, but it just isn't all the time. Any other assumptions, or anybody want to challenge anything I said there? Because it's certainly okay to have a different opinion. So if we agree with some of the assumptions, then it comes to the last question in the Atlas protocol of what are the implications of this work for teaching and for some of our systems. And again, I'm going to share with you here some of the things that we would recommend, that an implication of this data and assumptions would be these systemic gaps where in some cases, Missouri kids aren't even being exposed to all the standards. So Shirley, I'm glad you brought that up, because if you're a district who just, I'm going to give you an example. I work with a lot of rural districts, and a lot of times I'll say, what's your curriculum? And they'll pull out a 15-year-old textbook. that they've been using, because the funding is an issue, right? And they're like, this is my algebra, what I use for algebra. And so we had them go through a process where we said, okay, we'll look within your algebra book and find where do the Missouri priority standards lie in each chapter. And after an hour, she called me over and said, I have a huge problem. 6 of these priority standards are not even covered in this book. And I don't even start teaching some priorities until chapter 5, which is quarter 3. And so this, I think a lot of people are just unaware that we have systemic gaps. If you adopt a resource, which I get in some places, you will get bumped by just using a common resource sometimes, but you have to audit your resources, because a large part of our problem, Missouri, is we're not even exposing kids to all the standards. So that's number one. Or have we audited our resources to see that we're even getting to it? And then next, this idea of, if we do have a plan and we see that we're going to get to every one of them, do our teachers really have clarity around the rigor and the proficiency of what those state standards are? Because what I found is there's a huge misalignment. And I see that, Rachel, you mentioned assessment alignment. All the time, I would have teachers come to me, whether it was an assessment from their resource or one that they had developed or got off Teacher Pay Teacher. Don't get me started. So they would give it to me. And because I had been studying item specifications and map released items and had done a lot of standard work, I could easily see, this isn't what the state means, which I'm calibrating what they're going to see on that assessment, right? What does Missouri say is proficient? And their interpretation of that was different because of the resource they were using. And so these first 2 things, I think, are just an easy, quick win if our schools would take the time to audit. Are we covering them? Do we have a plan of how to cover all the standards? And then how do we give our teachers real clarity? And again, the state has more documents than they ever did when I started 20 years ago to help us see that clarity through item specs, etc. So the next one, once you've got those placed, it's this idea of, how do teachers know how to support students who have those instructional gaps, right? When accelerated learning and TNTP came on after the pandemic, all we heard was scaffold, scaffold, scaffold. Well, I'll tell you, when I started teaching my idea of scaffolding in 1st grade, if you didn't know that letter, I'd pull you back to a small group and I'm going to say it louder and slower, right? Like at some point, teachers don't know what strategies to employ with kids. And so having your special education teachers in on these conversations, I think we've seen a huge rise in trying to refer kids to SPED because teachers are freaking out with the learning gaps. And so there's this real need to prepare teachers and how to scaffold and understand the continuum of gaps. And let's see what, I think I had one more. Just this need, an implication, I think, is just more intentionality between and instructional collaboration and refinement. I think sometimes we spin our wheels on the what teachers should be doing. I think we need to get those curriculum places, audit. Do they know their standards? Do they have clarity? But we need to really focus, come back to DeFore's work of PLCs, to really be collaborating around instructional strategies to help scaffold and to make our tier 1 tighter. Because the other thing that I see instructional leaders as a pattern is weak tier 1 instruction. And sometimes that comes because they don't have clarity of the targets they should be doing. But sometimes I see teachers kind of giving out this weak tier 1 and then trying to run around and reteach everybody who didn't get it. And so if we could help teachers on the forefront really being tighter with their tier 1, I think that would be an implication of this work as well. I've got an awful lot. I'm going to tell you, some of you on this call are already our clients, and I'm not selling anything here, but I want to give you ideas of what we would suggest. That really, this is the why of what we're doing. And so on this last row, I want to encourage you that some of the innovative things we'd say to help fix the broken system is you've got to have curriculum organization and pacing guides that audit your textbook and clearly show every teacher what is a priority, what is a supporting, and have a plan that you're going to get to all those throughout the year. How many of you on this call came into our profession and didn't have a curriculum were asked to write it. This kind of perpetual systemic thing, you know, we would just encourage, have something where every one of your teachers who is there and who is coming in has a plan of what are my standards, priority, and supporting, and how am I going to teach them? And then work on, then once you have those standards paced, how are you going to help teams understand what those standards mean? One of the initiatives you saw that the State Department is doing with competency-based education, and some of that work really relies heavy on proficiency scales. So a lot of districts are having teachers engage in that work because you really have to divvy out those standards. What does proficiency mean? Teachers have to have clarity, and I'm still a Wiggins McTighe fan, and you got to backward design that stuff. Teachers have to know the target. So whether you engage teachers in writing their own proficiency scales, you know, we have those Missouri specific ones already, but they need to be engaging in that work where you're going to hear a lot from the state on student clarity, and that's all good and well, but teacher clarity precedes student clarity. So you've got to have your teachers clear on what those standards mean. And you've got to have, so Rachel and Shirley were talking about assessment alignment. Your assessment should look like, sound like what those kids are going to see. Not because we're about the test, but we're about equity in Missouri, and the equity we give is that we teach those standards to the proficiency. And then last, once you get these systems in place, right, where you got your things paced and you have clarity, you've got to give teachers time to collaborate on their practice and to give them ideas of how to improve instruction. It's like when we get behavior kids, right? Parents are doing the best they can. They're giving us our best. Teachers, for the most part, are giving you their best. So as leaders, we really need to refine, what do instructional focused PLCs look like? And we're trying to help bolster that up with some of the videos we're putting on here to give you ideas and things as clients you can play and use with your students. So you're going to see, or teachers, you're going to see over the next 2 or 3 months, we're going to be pushing out a lot of content around this idea of what PD do people need and instructional strategies. And we're going to be giving it to you as leaders and some PD sessions that you can be using with your teachers, because we have to teach them how to do things differently. Sorry, that was everywhere. So thoughts and debrief. We went through an Atlas protocol. We're going to put the link to that protocol in the chat because, you know, sometimes I was a principal who looked at data too much, and I was data rich and information poor. So I think having teachers, though, engage, and even as a leader, seeing their perception of the data, sometimes it's very different than yours, is helpful. So we wanted to leave you with a protocol. So thank you, Sue, for putting that in there. Any debrief or lasting thoughts? Kim, I see you said we're digging into Hattie's new book for, you know, instructional. Of course, Marzano and Hattie have research behind some of their new strategies with, hey, and I'll tell you, Hattie's work, collective efficacy and student clarity, student success criteria, right? It's all, clarity's huge. Feedback. Any other debriefs or thoughts for the call?
I'm going to drop the link at the beginning of the session today. We were talking about science, and I want to drop the link to Sue. Actually attended DESE's science content meeting last week. Was it last week?
Yes.
And if you have, I think it's like a 10 to 15 minute video. She debriefs everything she learned, and it's really good information to help kind of get the other side of the assessment from the person who is really on the ground of leading the development of it. So if you have time, definitely check that out.
Thanks, Val. You know, I would say that this call was important to me because as I looked at the data and was kind of numbed by the chart after chart after chart, looking almost the same for the student population that I served, it really just bothered me as an educator that it seemed like we're so stagnant in the state of Missouri. And perhaps if we compare with the rest of the United States, maybe scores are similar. But to me, it was just a call to action. And I know we all feel that, especially this time of year as we're getting our scores back. But it's not a us thing. It's what's happening systemically in the state of Missouri. And so I just thought it was important for us to be able to give educators a chance to look at the data all on one screen and just to have a few minutes just to talk about it. So I know Shauna and I hope that it's been helpful. We have some upcoming sessions that you might find useful. On October 19th on the network, we have an MSIP 6 call with Jocelyn Strand. She's going to be sharing some things with us that we know will help us better understand MSIP 6. And then we do have a fall client collaboration coming up on November 12th, where if you're a current client, you can come together and collaborate around our resources and your experiences you're having. And then I am recording a principal series, and the last 2 calls have been around proactive behavior and those students that are outliers. And then what we're all engaged in right now, teacher evaluation systems. Shauna, any final things we want to tie up here before we say goodbye?
No, I feel bad we were talking heads. Rachel, I want to give you a shout out because you told me you had lift in your score. So any leader moves, because it was exciting. I would love to hear any of your thoughts or suggestions, opinions for people.
Well, you hit it spot on. It's all about the fidelity of tier 1. What was huge for us, and doing some peer coaching with some of our lead teachers. And so, but yes, that tier 1 small group instruction, I think in ELA and math were a win for us.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Any other thoughts or questions?
I sat through new teachers or new principals yesterday. I'm a mentor, and you spend that whole first year like working on building relationships and managing your building and evaluating teachers. And it seems like we never get into the instructional part with training new principals. You know what I mean? It's like I didn't come from, I was a music teacher, so I wasn't in the classroom with testing and all this. So I came in as a principal thinking my teachers know what they're doing. They know the curriculum and the Missouri standards. And it probably took me 3 or 4 years to realize, oh, wait a minute, some of these are still doing Common Core. They're still doing their own thing, and they're not doing the learning standards. So it's been an eye-opener in these last 2 years of, especially in small schools where you don't have curriculum directors and you don't have this. And so I think DESE and MLDS needs to do a better job of, like, with new principals, getting that information out there that this is how your school is scored, and this is how you perform. So that was just my little tidbit.
Matt, and I will say that if you don't have, sorry, Shauna, if you, because we're not experts in their content. We're just not. And so really, and I'm just going to give praise to the MAT books, because giving that to the teachers was just a huge gift, because it just saved them so much time it was like there for them. All that work we used to put them through of unpacking the standards and creating the assessment, doing all that legwork. We've been blessed to hand them these tools. And so, we don't have to be experts in all the content areas.
But Rachel, I hope the power too, Matt, I think you're really hitting the idea that we need administrator PLCs, Matt, because you're not alone. I mean, we're not all going to speak up about our deficiencies of when we were, but we're all sitting here silently like, oh yeah, the instructional leader I wanted to be and the one that I could be because of all I managed. But Rachel, I hope you see it as part of our goal of those MAT books too, is to equip you as an instructional leader, that you don't have to know it all. You could give teachers a tool and just coach them through it, because we can all coach. Right? We can all, but I think that's part of what we're trying to do in this network, is give you a spot, because I believe I needed a PLC as an administrator. I was doing the best I could. And so, hopefully that's what we're trying to do with this, is just give you ideas of how to look at data. But we're trying to get more people to build a community on this, because we're trying to give you PD and community, because Roland Barthes says teacher learning precedes student learning. Well, I guess I'm making it up. Somebody else more famous than me has probably said it, but I say that leader learning precedes teacher learning. We have to be just as collaborative, and Marzano left that PLC out with the administrators. Leaders need it, right? Because we're leading our teachers. So I thank you for that vulnerability, because we've all felt it. And that's another systemic barrier of our field. We got to call it out. We got to come together and do the best we can. So thank you guys so much for your time today. Hopefully this was beneficial. And Rachel, I'll see you soon.